All right, buongiorno. Let's continue our conversation on Stoicism. As I said last time, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about grief, change, and fear from as Stoic a perspective as I can make it. So, the concept of change I find a very interesting one, and that is because we know from research that one of the hardest things I think for people to accept and adjust to is change. People like to think that they are not creatures of habit, that they don't need stability, but the reality is invariably we do. We do need a level of stability. We do value our routines a lot, and we need that initially to be happy, I think. Now, having said that, there are moments in life when change occurs. In the last video, I tried to address the topic of grief, and I think that's a very good example of something changes, and maybe unexpectedly changes, but it's something that you have to deal with. Now, change can occur for a number of reasons. It doesn't have to be someone passes away, a relationship and a friendship and something like that. It could be something simple as you move. Maybe you move to a different part of wherever it is you live. Maybe it's to a completely different city, a completely different country. And that requires adjustment. And I certainly know that for me, moving to Canada, I don't want to now spend 15 minutes talking about what it was like to move to Canada, but I mean, it is an adjustment. Even though both are quote-unquote Western cultures, the Netherlands where I grew up and then Canada, things are different. In Canada, the scale of things is very different. In the Netherlands, when you ask someone how far away something is, they say 50 kilometers, and here they say 3 hours, or it's 4 hours, because the distance is much bigger. So that's something to adjust to, let alone other things. The way people interact with each other is a little different. The foodstuffs that you find in the grocery store, so to speak, are different. So it's an adjustment, and I think that the first aspect of that type of adjustment, making that type of adjustment, is simply it will require some time. Now, I talked about that last time when I talked about grief, so I don't want to repeat everything I said at that point. But in a nutshell, time is required for you to adapt to a change. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight. Now, for some people, it might be easier than for others. Some people tend to be a little bit more flexible than others and find it easier to adapt. For me, it certainly took some time. It's just the way it is. So I think that's an important thing. I think another important aspect that I also kind of touched on last time we were talking about grief is consider the positive things. There are specific things that I have noticed in my move to Canada that have been very positive. For example, where I live now, I'm about hour and a half, maybe 2 hours driving away, depending on where you go, from the Rocky Mountains, which is something I enjoy a lot. I come from a country that's entirely below sea level. So there certainly are things that I miss from home, but this is now my home. And in my new home, I'm very close to mountains. And that's a lot of fun to me because I like the outdoors and I like mountain landscapes. So that is something you can look for in a positive sense of what are the things here that I enjoy, and can I maximize the things that I enjoy so that the things I enjoy less maybe become a bit subservient to that and are less important, are less emphasized. And that, I think, is, again, a very Stoic way of thinking, because it's one of the primary concepts in Stoicism. You can't necessarily change the situation, but you can always change your thoughts, right? Think about how you think about something. And when you understand that that is a possibility, that you can indeed think differently about things, well, then you can start to change how you look at things. And then a situation that initially may have been overwhelming may still be overwhelming, may still be difficult, it's still different, but it may feel a little less incredibly overwhelming. And I think that that remains a very important aspect. A final thought that I had, but that I think is a very important one that applies to many things, and certainly in dealing with change, it's something that figures largely, is examine your thoughts. Examine what it is that you feel and why that is how you feel. And this is something that I believe we don't always do enough of. And that can really get in the way of how we feel things and experience things. What I mean by that is, it's easy for humans to fall into a trap along the lines of, I'm in a new place, everything is unfamiliar, therefore everything is terrible. But you can think about, wait a minute, why do I actually feel this way? Is it really terrible? What is something that I can do to feel less terrible? Is there something fun that I can explore? Or is there kind of an adventure in being where I am now? And I remember thinking when I accepted the job that the place where I work now, it was an important decision, but one of my motivations was, it's a whole different province. I haven't been in Canada. I haven't been there. At that point, it was only a contract for a year, which turned into something more permanent. But I remember thinking, but it would be an adventure. For at least 1 year, I'd have an adventure. I'd be in a completely different place, different location, get to explore a whole new area. And it's a little scary, and I don't know anyone there, but I think it would also, or has the potential to also be fun and interesting. And it turns out that I really like it here. So this is what I mean by examine your thoughts. Examine what it is that upsets you about that thing. What about that specific change makes you concerned or worried? And sometimes I think that ties into the premeditatio malorum from Stoicism, which is just expect the worst. What is the worst thing that can happen? Well, in my case of a job, I may hate it there. It may be terrible. I may just like nothing about that area. But it was only a year-long contract at that point. So, if push would have come to shove and I would have absolutely hated it here, which I don't, but if I would have, it would only have been a year. Well, a year you can cope with. Before you know it, so a year is nothing, right? Time flies. So that is another way of sort of mentally flipping how you look at something. And by thinking about what could happen, what's the worst thing that can happen, etc., I think that can make a huge difference in how you approach a situation, how you feel about that situation, and how you appreciate that situation. And I'm still very happy in that case, I took the risk of coming here, because now it's turned into a permanent job. And again, it ended up that I really did like it here. I do like it. I like being here. I like this area a lot. Of course, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you may end up in a place you don't like, or there's a change that you really don't like, and that's, no matter what you do, it's still disturbing for you. But even then, ask yourself how permanent those negative thoughts truly are, and if there really is nothing that you can do to change the way you appreciate that situation. And think of what some people have endured and how they have managed to survive terrible circumstances by changing the way they thought. And then think about your changes, which is not to minimize what you're going through, but ask yourself, is what I'm going through actually that bad, or do I only perceive it to be that bad? Often it's that. I mean, I'm not talking about extreme cases, abusive situations. I'm just talking about normal everyday things, like you've moved to a different city or something like that, right? I have found those kinds of that type of reasoning. I found that very, very helpful. So maybe it will also be helpful to you, and maybe it won't be. Anyway, let me think what you do. Let me know what you think. How do you go about this? If you have to experience change, what do you do to make it easier? I've tried to relate this to some Stoic principles where I could, but let me know what you think. I always enjoy reading comments on these videos. So I hope this was useful, and I'll gladly see you later. Next time we'll try to talk about fear. That's the final one of this series of 3, I think. I mean, it has to be because it was a series of 3 and that's video 3. But I mean, this series of topics. See you next time. Bye.